Welcome into the Talkin Tide podcast on the Belly Up Podcast Network. I'm Chase Goodbread, sports writer and columnist with the Tuscaloosa News, joined by Travis Reier, the longtime senior analyst at BamaOnline.com. The Talkin Tide podcast available to you wherever you get podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, and of course we are live on YouTube and Facebook as well. The Twitter feed is Talkin_Tide. Get quick links to our twice weekly podcasts right there on Twitter, always with a quick link. So give us a follow there, give us a like, give us a subscribe on YouTube, and we'll take you through that 2023 Alabama football season, which is now just a little bit past halfway done, Travis. And quickly going to thank a couple of sponsors. Peterbrook Chocolatier of Tuscaloosa, also Heat Pizza Bar in downtown Government Square. Tell you a little bit more about those fine establishments later in the program. But tonight here in the midweeker, we're going to preview this Alabama home game against rival Tennessee. Travis, CBS broadcast, 2:30 p.m. kickoff. The Vols come in 5-1, Alabama comes in 6-1 and 4-0. Tennessee comes in 5-1 and 2-1 in conference play. And the magnitude of this game, Travis, we'll kind of start there. It's a big one for sure in the SEC race. The SEC East, maybe a little bit more wide open now with the injury to Georgia's best player, Brock Bowers. Looks like he's out indefinitely, maybe 4 to 6 weeks. But in the grand scheme of things, if we're just talking about reaching Atlanta, this one's a little bigger for Tennessee than it is for Alabama because they've already lost a conference game. Alabama has not. And this is a non-divisional game. It's a non-divisional game, obviously, for both teams. But Alabama could withstand a loss a lot easier in the race to win the West than Tennessee could withstand even a non-divisional SEC loss because that would be their second.
Yeah, if you're Tennessee and you're thinking you can take on another loss, then you better be pulling for the Florida Gators in a couple of Saturdays in Jacksonville to help you out. Although you lost head to head with Florida too. So it is very much a win or else type of situation for the Vols, who got to the bye week a couple weeks ago. We'll see if that maybe helps Tennessee, whereas Alabama, through this grind of 8 straight, trying to get to the bye week at 7-1 before LSU visits Tuscaloosa in early November. Yeah, I mean, it's not a divisional game, but really for both these teams for different reasons, certainly one they would like to put in their back pocket.
A huge one, no doubt about it. And a defensive battle, I think, is coming, Travis. I wrote this a little bit earlier in the week. I think this one's going to be low scoring. Both defenses have played well this season. Both offenses a little bit wobbly at times. And so it just kind of shapes up to me to conceivably be a little bit more of an old school game with an old school score, something in the 20s, I think could easily win this one.
Yeah, I'm with you. I agree. Earlier in the week, I talked about it and threw out there that maybe 1st to 24 is enough to get it done on Saturday at Bryant-Denny Stadium. Could be a game along the lines of what we saw in 2015, more recently, 19-14 game that Alabama won with Derrick Henry and those guys in a national championship season. I agree. I think, both these teams, it's interesting because it feels like the fan bases for both kind of look at the quarterback position a little bit suspect right now. And again, you kind of look at Jalen Milroe's numbers and you would think, maybe not so much, but Tennessee obviously feeling the same way I think about Joe Milton.
Yeah, Joe Milton only 100 yards passing last week in a victory over Texas A&M. That kind of jumped out for sure. But look, Tennessee has the best running game in the league. They average 230 a game on the ground. That's roughly 80 more yards per game on the ground than Alabama's rushing game gets offensively. And to me, it kind of all starts right there for that Alabama defense. I mean, the pass rush for Alabama has been great all year. And, yeah, it's important to get heat on Joe Milton. But stopping that running game is first and foremost, I think, for Kevin Steele this week.
Yeah, I agree. I think, we can talk about the potential for explosive plays through the air But this isn't, as we alluded to just a minute ago, this doesn't have the feel of anything close to last year's game, the 52-49 shootout where you had two quarterbacks combined for more than 800 passing yards. I don't think we're getting that. Maybe it was more like 900 passing yards in that game a year ago. I don't think we're getting that on Saturday. So for Alabama defensively, it sounds simple enough, but I think from its nickel package, how successful is it in defending this Tennessee run game at tempo, at pace? Because when you look at the offenses Alabama has seen so far this season, really hasn't seen anything. I guess South Florida a little bit because of the familiarity between coordinators and coaches from Tennessee to South Florida, maybe. But I don't think anything like what Tennessee's going to present on Saturday. And, Jalen Wright to me is the top running back in the SEC right now. Tennessee's back. And they've got two other guys, Dylan Sampson and Jabari Small, that can get it done as well. But Wright is just on a heater. He's had 4 100-yard games this season, one of the few in which he didn't. Well, that's a game Tennessee lost at Florida.
Yeah, Wright's had a phenomenal year in that Tennessee backfield. There's no doubt about it. And I don't disagree. I think he's played as well or better than any back in the league, which maybe isn't what you would have expected to say at this point in the preseason. But, Quinshon Judkins at Ole Miss has had some early season injury problems. He's getting loose right now. But his numbers were down in September because he was fighting through an injury. Same for Rocket Sanders at Arkansas, who ran for 13 or 1,400 yards last year. He hadn't been quite the same either. Jalen Wright, on the other hand, has been outstanding for the Tennessee Volunteers. For Alabama, offensively, it's a disruptive front seven, this Tennessee front seven. Travis, they get after the quarterback, James Pierce, 6 sacks, leads the team. But, it's not just the pass rush with Tennessee. They'll get after it in the run game and give you some negative plays in the run game as well. And, for Alabama, it seems like the offensive line issues have kind of been squeezed down towards that left tackle spot. Beginning of the season, it was like there were problems all over the place. Now they seem to be cleaning things up just about everywhere but left tackle. And that's a big position to be weak at. But at least they seem to have the other 4 spots gelling a little bit now.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Do they just continue to ride with Jaden Roberts at right guard? Because in 2 starts, he's been pretty good, I'd say. That Terrence Ferguson, it sounds like, still trying to get back from a high ankle sprain. Darian Dalcourt, is he going to be back in that mix? Sounds like right now, Jaden Roberts is the guy. And I think you're going to have to do it some different ways on the ground against this Tennessee front because they are aggressive in how they go about their business. You'll reference the Florida game a good bit because it's the game that Tennessee lost so far this season. But the Gators, I thought, really did a nice job of mixing it up, getting some perimeter stuff, some easy touches to the perimeter early. Graham Mertz played a really nice game at the quarterback position for Florida in that one, but Etienne was outstanding. We talk about best backs in the league. They might both be in the SEC East this season with Etienne and Wright of Tennessee. But it's going to take some mix. And we saw some of that from Alabama last week against Arkansas. It wasn't just the split zone concepts, duo. There were some gap type of runs with the pullers and counter action and kind of kept Arkansas guessing a little bit.
Yeah, we saw the guards pull a little bit against Arkansas, like we maybe haven't seen a whole lot of previously. Also, haven't seen much as far as a quick game with the Alabama passing attack this year. The one time you kind of noticed Alabama was going to the quick game was when they opened the second half in College Station against Texas A&M. We saw Jalen Milroe just trying to pepper A&M a little bit with some short stuff, and I thought Alabama was pretty successful with it in that instance. But it certainly hadn't been a big part of the offense overall. And against this Tennessee defense, especially with the way they can get after the quarterback, maybe we'll see a little bit more of that from Alabama.
Yeah, more of a controlled, almost West Coast approach to the passing game. As far as just today's quick game with a lot of throws to the perimeter and screens and things like that, We haven't seen much of that from Alabama. And that's something that the Alabama defense will get, I think, early from the Tennessee offense on Saturday. They're going to throw it out there to Squirrel White and Ramel Keaton and some of these guys with those wide receiver splits, and test Alabama one-on-one outside in space, and then really do a lot of that to set up what Tennessee likes to do, which is run the football between the tackles against light boxes, and then take some shots over the top.
Yeah, I think Kool-Aid McKinstry and Terry and Arnold, they've both been very good this season. One area where they've been very good is tackling, especially Arnold. He's a physical guy. Both of them are. And so if that's what Tennessee wants to go with early, just to test Alabama up there, unless they get some really good blocking on the perimeter, I would think Alabama might welcome that with the way
I think
Arnold.
they will if Malachi Moore plays, right?
Mhm.
If Malachi Moore plays, which it sounds like he's on track to do, having him at star gives you that ability to set harder edges with Arnold and Kool-Aid outside. With Trey Amos, you may
Different,
not
yeah.
be able to do that as much if you have to play Arnold inside. So I think Malachi's presence is important for a couple different reasons this week.
My dog Nigel agrees. If you just heard him bleed through the microphone there, he definitely sees it the same way. Malachi, we'll just hit on those injuries real quick. It sounds from Nick Saban's Wednesday comments like Moore and Dupree should be pretty good. Moore, of course, missed last week's game against Arkansas with an ankle injury. Suffered that injury, I believe, against A&M, and so he's been one of the best 2 or 3 defensive players on the team this year. He's been highly valuable. Run stopping, coverage, you name it. His return is huge. CJ Dupree came out of last week's game with a little bit of an injury. Sounds like he's going to be good to go too. But Nick Saban remaining at least somewhat cautious, even though both guys are back at practice.
Yeah, CJ Dupree in the Tuesday practice footage that Alabama distributed, it looked like he had one of those hamstring supports on that we'll see guys with, but he was running routes. And, even if you can't get as many snaps as you typically do out of him, if you can get him in that pairing with Robbie Oots, at least some, that helps you sort of augment your run game and your pass protections with him. So, Amari Niblack obviously going to be a part of that mix as well. And we saw a little bit of Danny Lewis last week against Arkansas once Dupree went out. So it's an area where they have depth, but certainly you'd like to have Dupree able to go if possible.
Yeah, no doubt. Dupree is a guy that gives them both a blocker and a receiver downfield. Oots pretty much just a blocker. Niblack pretty much is just a receiver. And sometimes personnel wise, the tight ends can tip the defense a little bit in terms of what might be coming, especially if you're flexing tight ends out. Dupree, on the other hand, it's a little bit less of a tell, I think, when he's in the game. Certainly in one tight end sets. If he's in there with Oots, that definitely tips things for the defense a little bit toward that. It's probably going to be a run.
Yeah, and he's got the size, you're right? Dupree 245 or so. Niblack is added bulk and strength, but you would like him more in there in some 11 personnel where you can, flex him out and kind of give the defense more of a 4 wides almost look to try to deal with. And again, I think they're pretty good in terms of depth there, so should be fine regardless. But obviously, you want to have your best people available.
All right, Talkin Tide podcast on the Belly Up Podcast Network. Going to take a quick look at what's happening with this game in Las Vegas and with the ticket man as well. Travis, out in Vegas, the Sharps have this thing, Alabama by 8.5 to 9 points, depending on which sports book you're looking at. That number's actually down. When it started at the beginning of the week, I think it was 10, maybe even 10.5 in a couple of places. And so you can tell which way the bettors are going right now at any rate. But even down from 10, I think 8.5 or 9 sounds a little high to me.
Yeah, that's public money, I think, early in the week. It's usually the sharps that like to come in late. So we'll see what maybe some whales do as we get closer to kickoff. But I thought it was a high number myself to open the week. I understand that when you look at this Tennessee team, 6 games, 5 of them played within the state of Tennessee, only 1 road trip to date, and it didn't go well in Gainesville. I think there's a little bit of caution or concern about Joe Milton, maybe in this particular instance. And I just think a lot of people still think, even people who set lines, Alabama's going to restore order in this situation. After losing last year, you kind of go back to that stat of how many teams post back-to-back wins over Nick Saban coached Alabama teams. There's a lot of that stuff, I think, that goes into it.
Over-under sitting at 48.5. It's 49 in a couple of places. That's my play this week. That's my official recommendation going into the Tuscaloosa news. I like it. I don't love it. I mean, we talked earlier that you and I both expect a defensive game. So I do think this thing comes in under. On the other hand, in this day and age of college football, it doesn't get much lower than 48 or 49. Sometimes you see 46s and 47s here and there, depending on who's involved. But the way scoring has gone up in the game across the board over the last several years, it's hard to find anything in the mid-40s. So you never know how these things are going to play out. But I do think it'll end up under 49.
Yeah, the great unknown is non-offensive touchdowns. Tennessee scored one last week on a punt return. If you were in that over-under deal with Alabama, Texas A&M, I guess, a few weeks back, Alabama losing that blocked field goal return for a touchdown, probably, I guess, I don't remember the total for that game, but I think it was kind of similar to this one. You could have been impacted. That to me is the great, again, unknown, is non-offensive touchdowns. Crazy things happen in college football. And you're right. That's a low total for that level of the sport.
That under crowd, Travis, they love picks, but they hate pick sixes.
Yes.
You see them
they
sometimes.
They cheer the interception and immediately change to tackling.
Yeah. If you're sitting with under guy, you love to watch them. They see that pick and they're up off their seat, and then they're like, "Oh no!"
Or if the game's been decided, they'll coach that interceptor to get down. Get down. You don't need the return here. The game's over. Get out.
Always fun. All right. The Ticket Man, Travis, we talked about how this is kind of a get-back game for the Ticket Man. $150 to $200 at Bryant-Denny Stadium for the cheap seats around the upper deck. A little north of $200 if you're trying to sit, in the middle of the field up there. And if you're down low, seeing those prices before we went on the air, somewhere in the neighborhood of $350 to $500 for those high dollar seats. But the man kind of needs this one, doesn't he? Especially after those soft prices from the Arkansas game.
Well, and what helps the man in these next 2 home games isn't just the Alabama crowd. The visiting crowd will travel. That's been I think the biggest blow to the Ticket Man in recent years, is that opposing fan bases don't travel, in my opinion, like they used to, not as fervently.
Right.
And so, if you're a Tennessee fan, you may not be extremely confident about the Vols' chances on Saturday, but this isn't exactly 2020 Alabama either, right? And if it happens to go down in favor of UT, you'll be able to say, I was there for the first win in Tuscaloosa since 2005? You got to go back, or no, 2000. It was actually 2003, because Alabama won the 2005 game. So you're talking 20 years.
Yeah.
Since Tennessee, and Tennessee shouldn't have won the 2003 game. That was like the Casey Clausen 4th and 19.
That was the 5 overtime game.
Yeah.
That wild 5 OT game.
Yeah.
That was back before the 2-point tries were mandated, wasn't it?
I think so. Yeah.
Or at least they weren't mandated maybe as early as they are
Arkansas
now.
Playing 26 overtimes, with Houston Nutt. No, I mean, if you're a Tennessee fan, why not make the trip?
Absolutely. All right. The Talkin Tide podcast on the Belly Up Podcast Network. Going to thank a couple of sponsors here really quickly now. Going to start by telling you all about Heat Pizza Bar in downtown Tuscaloosa. Great spot for you and your family if you're looking for great food and a great atmosphere in the downtown area, and especially if you're out and about this weekend for this Alabama home game against Tennessee. You don't want to deal with the crowds and the craziness on the Strip. just head downtown. Go to Government Square, 2256th Street, and Frank Fleming's great staff will have you covered with plenty of flat screen TVs on all the big games, a full bar as well. Heat Pizza Bar offers fantastic signature pizzas, wide array of salads, excellent appetizers, including those jalapeno poppers that I'm a big fan of. And you got to try that standard when you're looking at some of these signature pizzas. House red sauce, pepperoni, Italian sausage, green peppers, sweet onions, and mozzarella. Great daily specials, too, over at Heat Pizza Bar. Pepperoni or cheese pizza on Thursdays from 2 to 6 p.m., just $8. You can't beat that. $3 off of cocktails from 11 a.m. to 10 p.m. on Thursdays as well. So the next time you're in the mood for some great pizza, check out Heat Pizza Bar, 2256th Street, downtown Government Square.
I'm going to tell you about Peterbrook Chocolatier out there at 1530 McFarland Boulevard North in the Indian Hills section of Tuscaloosa. Chase talked about sort of getting out of the melee this weekend, or home game weekends in general. That's one of the great benefits about Peterbrook Chocolatier as well. Just across the bridge from the University of Alabama campus, as you head towards Northport there on McFarland Boulevard, you're going to find Peterbrook Chocolatier, and they are worth the trip. No doubt about that. All of those great chocolate treats waiting for you. That chocolate covered popcorn, hand dipped chocolate strawberries on a daily basis at Peterbrook Chocolatier, 1530 McFarland Boulevard North in the Indian Hills section of Tuscaloosa.
All right, the Talkin Tide podcast on the Belly Up Podcast Network, the Twitter feed, Talkin_Tide. Give us a follow there. Again, we're live on YouTube and Facebook as well. Check us out in those locales too. We're going to take a look at the rest of the SEC schedule beyond the Alabama-Tennessee game this week, Travis, and it's pretty light, frankly. Only four head-to-head SEC games this week, including Alabama-Tennessee. You got one non-conference game. That'll be LSU hosting Army. Camouflage end zones for that one. Tip of the cap to LSU for putting that together. That's pretty cool. But elsewhere, Travis, Ole Miss at Auburn. We'll start there. Auburn really, really struggling offensively. It's a total mess for Hugh Freeze on that side of the ball in his first year on the Plains. Got to like Ole Miss on the road there.
I would think so. This has been a series, though, that's heavily tilted towards the Auburn Tigers. I think 6 out of the last 7. It was a win in Oxford last year by Ole Miss that snapped a 6-game winning streak for the Auburn Tigers. But yeah, when you look at these specific teams, I think LSU, we heard a lot after last week's win by 30 over the Tigers, the Auburn Tigers, that Brian Kelly talking about improvement on defense. Well, I don't know if we can really tell that based on, what Auburn is right now offensively. So obviously Auburn needs this thing to kind of be a rock fight, and Lane's going to look to try to motorboat and, really take it to Auburn offensively. And plus Ole Miss coming off a bye week should be rested and ready to go.
Yeah, Brian Kelly a couple weeks ago about LSU's defense. I think this might have been after they just kind of nipped Missouri by 10 in a pretty close game that was, I think, a 3-point game until the final minute. Brian Kelly said, Travis, no one's going to confuse our defense with the 85 Bears, he said.
No,
you think, Brian?
No. And I think he tried to sort of walk that back a little bit with his comments about improvement after the Auburn game. But yeah, it remains to be seen for LSU. And we won't really find out this week against an academy offense and Army, which I know you think about tough preps midway through the season and some option football from Army, but this isn't exactly an Army offense either that is along the lines of what we've seen from some of the previous groups that they've had.
Spencer Rattler and the South Carolina Gamecocks head to Missouri, Travis. Been a strong year for Missouri. Of course, they've just lost the one game to LSU. How do you see that one playing out in Columbia?
The Mayor's Cup, the two Columbias getting together. I think it's going to be a fun game, man, because I think both these offenses have the potential to put up points. Poor Shane Beamer, man, broke his foot kicking that Gatorade bucket after the loss to Florida last week out of frustration. And if he was frustrated,
I missed that.
You didn't see that? You didn't hear that? Yeah, he's got a broken foot. He
Oh,
was so
mercy.
upset after that loss, after blowing that 10-point lead in the final 5 or 6 minutes last Saturday, that broke his foot kicking a Gatorade cooler, apparently. So he'll hobble out to Como with his team. Brady Cook playing at a high level. I kind of feel for Spencer Rattler because he's really having a hell of a season. He's now a couple of seasons into this thing where he's been really good. And from an NFL perspective, I got to think, Chase, he's helped himself as much because there's been consistency in what he's doing. You know, he was kind of known at Oklahoma, a little bit of a head case, a little bit too much up and down. For a program that's been up and down, he hasn't been that kind of guy for South Carolina. He's been really good.
Yeah, he got benched, I think, for a game or two at OU his freshman year. Ends up at South Carolina, and he hadn't been well protected. So you got to tip your hat to him even more because the pressure. I mean, South Carolina has not been able to pass block much at all. So for what he's been able to do, given the heat he's been under in terms of sacks and whatnot, yeah, I think he's done fine. Mississippi State at Arkansas, Travis. How is it possible that Will Rogers and KJ Jefferson, who are two of the best quarterbacks in the league, don't have an SEC win between them? They're 0-7 in the league right now, but between the two of them.
Yeah, somebody's got to get an SEC win here, right, between these two teams. And I think Mississippi State, kind of like Ole Miss, coming off the bye week, probably a lot more juice right now, a lot more gas in the tank than this Arkansas team that is in the throes of a 5-game losing streak and really in need of a bye week of its own. But, you know, Arkansas hasn't played at home in literally a month, played in Fayetteville. So that could be what it needs to kind of sustain some energy throughout at least this game. Who knows? I like KJ Jefferson better than I like Will Rogers. So if you're going to ask me to make a pick in that game, I'd probably go KJ at home.
Yeah, at least, you know, Sam Pittman's going to put the game in KJ's hands as much as he possibly can. You don't quite know that with Will Rogers this year.
And there's some injuries. I mean, Woody Marks is banged up. We'll see. Again, the bye week may have done him and Will Rogers a lot of good because they needed it health-wise.
All right, let's jump in that two-deep tumbler before we get out of here really quick. See who pops out. Somebody in that Alabama two-deep is going to come out of here, and we will got number 7 here, Ja'Cory Brooks, Travis. An interesting name to come out of the tumbler because you're talking about a guy in Ja'Cory Brooks whose role has dissipated from one year to the next. I mean, he was a frontline wide receiver for Alabama last year, along with Jermaine Burton. He was top dog in that unit a year ago.
Yeah.
This year, not so much. His snaps are down. His production's down. It's been striking, certainly, to see what's going on with Brooks's playing time.
Yeah, it seems like Malik Benson has benefited the most from that. We've seen Malik kind of open some games at that spot. We've seen Isaiah Bond, obviously, a big part of things to go along with Jermaine Burton. But at some point in this season, I still think Ja'Cory Brooks is going to step forward in the offensive scheme of things. I'll tell you, special teams wise, he's still been good.
Blocked a
punt, and they still depend on him a lot. He and Q Robinson, if you picked a guy from the offense and probably a guy from the defense, Roydell Williams too, you see a good bit in special teams. You know, those are kind of the core special teams guys, the veterans that they kind of lean on in the kicking game. But I still think Ja'Cory, again, at some point this season, I don't know if it'll be so much in the way of quantity, but as far as quality, I think he'll still be there at some point.
All right, that is going to do it for this midweek edition of the Talkin Tide podcast on the Belly Up Podcast Network. Be sure to join Travis Reier and myself on Sunday when we recap Alabama's game against Tennessee. Until then, for Travis Reier of BamaOnline.com, I'm Chase Goodbread, sports columnist with the Tuscaloosa News, and we'll talk to you next time right here on Talkin Tide.